Have you told Jonathan that he used to play under the Roosevelt table?
Yes, and a matter of fact, when he left, when we left the White House in January 1977, the president invited the senior staff to come in as they typically do, in, you know, in different shifts. And when I came in, we came in with Jonathan, and the president looked at him, picked him up, and just put him in his chair. So Jonathan has this picture sitting in the president's chair. And when we left, when Bush 41, who was actually my mentor, when we left the Bush 41 White House, Jonathan said to the president, "I need to sit in that chair." And so Jonathan was then 16, I think, 1975. Wait a minute, 1975, 1992, about 16, wasn't he? He has this picture of the president standing behind the chair with Jonathan sitting in the chair. So yes, he has 2 of those photos.
That's awesome. I would rave those around. You know. So when you left the Ford White House, what did you do?
Well, I stayed home. Excuse me. We had our second child in April of 1977, and when I left in January of 1977, I was really tired. I was really upset. I really thought Gerald Ford should have had a full term. I predicted, I wasn't prescient. I just looked at Jimmy Carter and said, this is not going to work. This is not going to be a good 4 years. So I decided to stay home, and I stayed home until June 1978. We had our third child in November 1978. But again, John Gardner, who founded the White House Fellows Program and then founded Common Cause, and was head of the Urban League as well at one point in time. No, that's not right. No, but he founded Common Cause, and he'd been head of the Carnegie Endowment. He called me and said that the Aspen Institute that John Rockefeller III wanted to fund a program at the Aspen Institute on the future of private philanthropy, and would I come run it? So I did. John Rockefeller gave the Aspen Institute $100,000, which was a lot of money in 1978, and then 2 weeks later he was killed in a car crash in Westchester outside his estate. This is the present Senator Rockefeller's father. And so I came, and I had these 2 kids, and I was actually pregnant with my third because, well, back up a second, my 2 oldest are adopted. And the doctors made it very, very, very clear that I would never, ever get pregnant. My fallopian tubes were not attached. There was absolutely no possibility. And then I got pregnant with Gillian and while I was not working. And instead of being, this was an early fertility practice when fertility was not the way it was now, but it's an early practice out in Bethesda somewhere. And when I went in, I really didn't feel well, and I went in and I said to the doctor, I said, I think I am pregnant. He said, that's ridiculous. You are not pregnant. You cannot be. And I said, I really think I am. I said, would you do me a favor and just do a test? He said, well, I'll do a test, but it's just something with your hormones, and you're not pregnant. So the nurse calls me 2 or 3 days later, however long it took in those days to do the test, and she was so excited, and she said, Bobby, you're pregnant. And I was so excited. And I was just thrilled, and I went in to the doctor the next week, and I just wanted to kiss him and hug him, and he was angry because I had defied his diagnosis. He had said it wasn't possible, and what the heck, what was I doing pregnant? Well, since it was viewed as a high-risk pregnancy, Bill and I decided we're just going to stay with him. But as soon as Gillian was born, we left. And his parting concept, literally in the delivery room, was, this is the only child you will deliver naturally. You will never get pregnant again. 11 months later, Cameron was born, and so he was wrong. and then
just a bit.
And then 8 years after that, our fifth child, Andrew, was born. But my point was that the Aspen Institute back in those days. Well, I don't know what my point was, but the Aspen Institute back in those days was part of the nonprofit philanthropic world, and it was a very different world than it was today. People were not really scrambling, and if you did. They were very flush with money, and if you did one really intelligent thing a week, everybody thought that was great, and that was such a different pace from the White House or what In-Q-Tel must be like or whatever, where you're constantly, or a law firm where you're keeping your billable hour sheets, where you're constantly on. In the nonprofit world in those days, especially the think tank nonprofit world, there was not that pressure. So I loved it. I was supposed to be working 3 or 4 days a week, and they only pay me on that. But I would come. There was a couch, so I could actually come and get away from 3, 3 children, and then later 4 children, and just kind of relax. And so I was there on this project for the future of private philanthropy for 4 years.
This is fascinating, though.
From 78 to 82.
So
And,
did they fund it anymore? Did you just, was that 100,000 or was more money?
No, we then raised, at Aspen you had to kind of raise your own money, and we raised it from other foundations. I had an advisory board, and it was also at Aspen, the policy back then was that you didn't write documents or reports. They wanted people to feel that they could freely come together for seminars and symposiums and share their views. And though those views would be recorded and be in an archive someplace, they would never, they'd be available to the people who were participants, but they would never be published. And so you didn't have the problem of having to write papers and documents. You just brought people together to talk about issues.
God, I would love to go see those archives. I bet there's fascinating discussions that I would love to get my hands on and read.
Me too. I have no idea what's happening to them.
We'll have to see if we can find out. That would be just fascinating because I think you could draw a real historical perspective today from what we were talking about then. So this sounds pretty good, and I like your comment that you had to have one intelligent thought a week. If only, if only. It seems like today you have to have them like every 5 minutes. So when you left there, next up.
A person who was at the Aspen Institute with me, a fellow named Doug Bennett, who later became president of Wesleyan and head of NPR, was there doing another project. And he, there was a guy in Chicago who wanted to fund a think tank on American politics. And Doug asked me if I'd go with him. So it was called the Roosevelt Center for American Studies. It wasn't American politics, American Studies. And I was there for 2 years. And I was the general counsel, and we did a number of studies. One of the ones we did was the use of this new thing called technology in political campaigns. And when you look back at the paper, it is just so elemental. You just laugh at it. But at that time, this was the big thing. You know, you could actually sort. You could have these big computers that could sort people by certain interests and by sex and race and age and zip code and things like that. So I did that for 2 years, and the center fell on hard economic times, basically. So I said, okay, I now have 4 children. I am going to stay home for real. And I was, both times I stayed home, I was very involved in our community. And I wound up running for the state senate, not the U.S. Senate, but the state senate in Virginia, which was everything in Virginia is an odd year, so this was in 1987, and I decided to do it in the fall of '86. And I did it because I had been very involved in the community, and I wound up losing by 1 point to a wonderful man who was the dean of the Northern Virginia delegation. He was about 75 at that time, named Clive Duval, and our kids went to the same private school, and he'd gone to law school. I mean, it was all he grew up in Greenwich. And we just disagreed on issues, but he was a very nice man. And I think it was the last civil race that I've seen in a long time because he was 70 or 75, he had problems with night vision driving. So I would go pick him up. I'd go to his house, I'd pick him up, we'd go debate at these community centers. This was, it was a little state senate race. We'd debate at the McLean Community Center or the Great Falls Community Center or whatever, and then I'd drive him home. And people, and the press didn't cover us at all because this was really boring. We were just, we were friends. We weren't yelling at each other, and we were just discussing issues. The night we lost by the 1 point, and nobody had come, as I said, within 15 points of him before that, we went, my staff and I, we were supposed to all go to this party that the Republican Party was having. We looked at each other and said, we don't want to do that. So we got into a caravan of about 10 cars, and we went over to Clive's estate. And we knocked on the door and we said, "Hi, we're here to concede." And he had a party going on with all his supporters, all of whom were our friends. And so we went in and we just all had a party. That doesn't happen anymore.
So maybe we should have a rule that you are required now, if you're opposing candidates, you have to drive each other, take them driving to each other in carpool to the debate. And there's something, and then when you concede, then the party's at the other person's house, and just show up. I love it. I love it.
Doesn't happen anymore.
You have real chutzpah. That's what I love about you, Bobby.